LakeCo Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge George C. Pierce presiding.
May be seated. Good morning. All right, we're here in a matter of State of Indiana and the relation of the Honorable Sonia A. Morris, Judge of the East Chicago City Court versus Gilda Orange et al., 45 CO1, 1302 PL12. For the record, who's here?
Lenny Francisci, President of the East Chicago Common Council, representing the Common Council, and Attorney Stephen Bauer.
Attorney John Schwall, Your Honor, on behalf of Judge Morris, who is seated by law.
Are we ready to proceed?
Judge would move for separation of witnesses, please.
Okay. Anybody, whoever in the courtroom is going to testify? The bailiff close the door. Ma'am, would you just shut that door behind you, Mr. Small, if you make sure the door gets shut? You ready?
I am, Your Honor.
Right. Want to call your first witness, or?
Can I hear an opening statement or just call the witness?
Well, do you think we need to hear an opening, or pretty much? It's up to you.
The only thing I'd like to say, Your Honor, and I apologize for not giving you this case previously, but the law seems to me to be well settled about the ability and power of a judge to have a budget which the judge believes is necessary for the operation of the court. The case that really, in my opinion, sets forth the standards is the Carlson, C-A-R-L-S-O-N versus Stodola case, 220 Northeast 2nd, 532. Just to give Your Honor a short preview of how I intend to proceed, the council, after it had passed the budget in the fall of 2012, and after this mandamus action was filed, retained its financial advisor, its regular financial advisor, to do an analysis of the operation of the East Chicago City Court compared to the City Court of Hobart, the Town Court of Maryville, and the Town Court of Sheriffville. I've asked Professor Bernard, or Dr. Bernard, to do an analysis comparing those four courts, and I would like to call him as my first witness to provide the court evidence of his analysis. So I will call Dr. Bernard as my first witness after Mr. Bauer has an opportunity to say what he wants to say.
Judge, let me summarize. It's much easier. Evidence is very much going to show that the city of East Chicago, since the opening of the riverboats around 1996, has had a substantial amount of cash as a result of gaming income. What happened, our evidence is going to show, is that the payrolls and the employment in East Chicago skyrocketed. The Common Council, as well as the mayor, basically used all of the gaming funds to run the entire city and to pay for almost all of the expenses of the city by transferring monies from the gaming, from the casino fund into the general fund to meet budget. For example, there's no garbage charge in East Chicago. The city picks up the whole tab. So what happened was, Your Honor, the evidence is going to show that in 2003, there were close to 1,050 people receiving paychecks every 2 weeks in the city of East Chicago. It is no overstatement to say that this was a bloated payroll. The evidence is going to show, Judge, without going into big detail, that beginning with the housing crunch fall, beginning with the tax freeze in 2005, beginning or coupling with lawsuits involving casino funds with Ameristar that was pending before the Gaming Commission, litigation pending with Ameristar over their assessments, resulting in issues of millions of dollars of payback and tax monies. Also with issues of assessment with BP Amico and funds to be received there. The 1%, 2%, 3% cap, all of this severely impacted the city of East Chicago. And elected officials, other than the judge, over the last 3 years, have began a policy of trying to wean the city away from its incredible reliance upon gaming funds in order to render all of these citizens, or all of these services to the citizens in East Chicago. When the housing crunch hit and everything else hit, there was a tremendous amount of foreclosure in East Chicago, as most places. The result was that the tax collections were even lower than the years before. Now, given that, what has happened is that over the last 3 years, there's been a substantial reduction in the expenditures out of the general fund for the below payroll. In the summer of this year, for example, instead of 1,050 paychecks being issued every 2 weeks, there were 560. That is major effort by the city in order to reduce their expenditures and to get their budget close to being non-dependent upon gaming funds. Judge, during the same period of time...
So where do the gaming funds go? What are they used for?
They're supposed to be used for infrastructure improvement.
Oh, okay.
There's also going to be evidence, Judge, that there are a number of combined sewers and sanitary sewers that have just been literally ignored. That finally the elected officials have made the policy decision which we believe they are constitutionally and statutorily authorized to do, to reduce the expenditures in their general fund. What happened, Your Honor, was that all the departments were addressed, reductions were done, and the council made the policy decision that there needed to be shared sacrifice and requested in the fall of 2012 that the judge's budget also participate in this effort to reduce the expenditures. Judge, another issue that is crucial to this matter is for Your Honor's information. The city court in East Chicago has 3 separate budgets. One's a general fund budget that is a subject of this mandamus. The next 2 budgets are adult probation budget and court programs budget. The long and the short, our evidence is going to show, Judge, that midway or at the beginning of the year, there was around $150,000 in the adult probation budget. That amount mid-year of 2013 has even increased, I believe, to over $160,000. The city's position, the council's position is that the judge, when she received her reduced budget in the general fund, she had the separate monies already in the adult probation fund that could have been used by her for the payment of probation officers and even for probation secretaries. That the State Board of Accounts indicates that this money can be used for probation services. Thus, it is the council's position, Judge, that no mandate is in fact required or needed, as the judge had a legitimate, legal, appropriate way of meeting her payroll expenditures or her operational costs. To now mandate $65,000 or $83,000 when the judge, with a simple action, could have solved this is unreasonable and unwarranted. Our evidence will in fact show, Judge, a comparison of the cost per case among similar sized communities. And the judge is extremely aware of Holbert, Maryville, and Sherrville in their court's operations and the statistics that come out of the State Judicial Center, and Carl Cinder, the financial advisor for the Common Council, will present testimony. The bottom line of his testimony and our evidence will be that the cost per case in each Chicago City Court is at least, if not more, than 2 times the cost in these other 3 communities that are of similar size. Thank you, Judge.
You want to call your first witness?
Yes, sir.
You stand to be sworn, sir. You solemnly swear affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to your knowledge. So
I do.
you may be seated.
State your name for the court, please.
James, middle initial A, last name Bernard, B as in boy, E-R-N-A-R-D.
Where do you live, sir?
Of Valparaiso.
Could you give the court a brief background regarding your education?
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration from Manhattan College. I have a doctorate in economics from Notre Dame.
Give the court a brief background of your teaching experiences.
I taught full-time for 38 years at Valparaiso University as a tenured professor in economics. I retired from full-time teaching in 2004. I'm now emeritus, which means I don't teach regularly. I occasionally come in and do some seminars and so forth, but that's my background in terms of teaching.
Let me show you what the court reporter has marked as plaintiff's exhibit number 1. Could you identify that exhibit for the court, please?
Yes, this is a 7-page copy of my current CV.
Does your current CV state your employment in your work in the community?
Yes. In addition to the university appointment, which I mentioned that I had for 38 years, I was also on the Valparaiso School Board for 12 years, from 1997 to 2009. And I also run 2 other entities. One is New Beginnings Counseling in South Haven, which is a rehab treatment program for adolescents in intensive outpatient for substance abuse. I'm the president and financial owner of that. My daughter, who's a mental health counselor, actually runs it. In addition, I'm a registered investment advisor and have been since 1980. In that capacity, I manage pension plans for companies and individuals. In terms of community service, I've been involved in a number of community activities, Race Diversity Council for the City of Valparaiso, coaching situations with youth in baseball, basketball, soccer.
At this time, Your Honor, we'd offer in evidence plaintiff's exhibit number 1.
Any objection, Mr. Bauer?
No, you don't.
Good, number 1's admitted.
Dr. Bernard, does the State of Indiana Department of Local Government Finance publish various statistics about budgets for cities and towns in Indiana?
Yes, they do.
Does the Department of Local Government Finance for the State of Indiana issue reports on the per capita spending of various cities and towns in the state of Indiana?
Yes, they do.
Let me show you what I've marked as plaintiff's exhibit number 2. And ask you if that is such a report.
Yes, it is, and I have a copy of that report.
Does the State of Indiana Department of Local Government Finance regularly gather information about the budgets of various cities and towns within the state of Indiana?
Yes, they do.
Do they regularly report financial information about the budgets of various cities and towns in the state of Indiana?
Yes, they do.
At this time, Your Honor, we'd offer in evidence plaintiff's exhibit 2.
John, the whole thing?
Well, it's just page 42 is all we're going to refer to.
Judge, I have no objection. I've got a copy of page 42.
Okay, that'll be the only one that we're going to deal with here.
Yes.
Page 42.
Yes, sir. Dr. Bernard, calling your attention to page 42 of exhibit number 2, does the exhibit list the non-enterprise expenditure per capita and the total expenditure per capita for the city of East Chicago, the city of Hobart, and the towns of Merrillville and Sherrillville?
Yes, on that page it listed for both 2011 and 2012.
Now, there are different columns. One says non non-enterprise expenditures.
Correct.
Could you explain to us, please, what is meant by non-enterprise expenditures?
Well, under the State Board of Accounts system of definitions, non-enterprise has to do with units of government, municipalities, that generally do not produce revenue per se. Enterprise categories would include revenue-producing units such as a water unit, sewer treatment, things of that nature. And while the court system does produce revenue, it's not a revenue-producing unit per se by definition. So the courts are under the non-enterprise category. And so this chart has both non-enterprise expenditures per capita and total expenditures per capita for 11 and 12 for all of the 4 communities that you referenced.
According to Exhibit 2, what is the non-enterprise expenditure per capita for the civil city of East Chicago for the calendar year 2011?
For 2011 for East Chicago, the non-enterprise expenditures per capita would be $3,251.92.
And then, as far as that per capita spending, that is $3,251.92 non-enterprise expenditure, where does East Chicago rank among the cities and towns in Indiana for that amount of spending?
It's high, a level of 12 out of some 500 units.
All right, then if we go to Hobart, what is the non-enterprise expenditure per capita for the year 2011?
That would be $1,481.22.
And then for 2012, what is the non-enterprise expenditure for the civil city of Hobart?
For 2012, it would be $1,384.57.
And where does Hobart rank in the spending non-enterprise expenditures per capita among Indiana cities and towns?
They're ranked 98th.
And then if we go to Maryville civil towns, what is the 2011 non-enterprise expenditure per capita for 2011?
For Maryville, it would be $1,278.60.
And for 2012, what would the non-enterprise expenditure per capita by the civil town of Maryville be?
$1,330.07.
And where does Maryville rank among the cities and towns in Indiana regarding its per capita non-enterprise expenditure for the year 2012?
It ranks 107th.
All right. Then finally, if we would go to Sherrville, what is the non-enterprise expenditure per capita for the civil town of Sherrville for the year 2011?
$850.97.
And the same figure for the year 2012, what is that?
$752.11.
And where does Sherrville rank among cities and towns in Indiana regarding its non-enterprise expenditure per capita for the calendar year 2012?
232nd.
Now, you've reviewed Mr. Sender's analysis that he prepared in March of 2013, is that correct, sir?
Yes, I did.
And Mr. Sender chose Hobart, Maryville, and Sherrville because the population of each of those towns and city is somewhat similar to the population of East Chicago. Is that correct, sir?
Correct.
have you made a percentage comparison basis to tell the court the difference percentage-wise between the East Chicago Civil City budget, non-enterprise for the calendar year 2012 versus Hobart?
You're talking about salaries versus total budget?
No, I'm talking about just what's the difference, if you made the computation, what's the percentage difference between the per capita non-enterprise expenditure for East Chicago compared to Hobart, Maryville, and Sherrillville?
Well, I think the numbers, percentage-wise, the non-enterprise expenditures for Chicago is 70% of its total expenditures per capita.
All right.
That's for East Chicago. And for Hobart, their non-enterprise expenditures per capita as a percentage of total expenditures per capita is 84%. And for Maryville, the non-enterprise expenditures per capita, they have the same figures, so it's 100% based on this report. And for Sherrillville, non-enterprise expenditures per capita as a percent of total expenditures is 67%. So East Chicago is 70%, Hobart is 84%, Sherrillville is 67%, and I'm not going to include Maryville because they're the same number. So it's really in the middle between Sherrillville at the low end and Hobart at the high end. That is non-enterprise expenditures as a percentage of total expenditures per capita.
In addition to publishing data about the per capita expenditure of cities and towns in Indiana, does the Indiana Department of Local Government Finance also publish data regarding budget comparisons for each of the cities and towns in Indiana?
Yes.
And have you reviewed the budget comparisons published by the Indiana Department of Local Government Finance for the calendar years 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012?
Yes.
Now, in addition to the statistics regarding the total budget of various cities and towns in Indiana, published by the Indiana State Department of Local Government Finance, are there also publications by the court system detailing the budgets of the court systems throughout the state of Indiana?
Yes.
And have you reviewed those statistics for the calendar years 2004 to 2012?
For salaries, yes.
And you have with you all the publications of the data on which you're relying in your analysis.
Right. These are the official court documents, Indiana Judicial Service reports from 2004 through 2011. Through 2012.
Let me show you what has been marked for identification purposes as Plaintiff's Exhibit 3. is that a summary of the data that you looked at for the budgets of East Chicago, Hobart, Maryville, and Cherville, and the court salary budget for those same four governmental entities?
Yes, this is a summary comparing the salaries from the courts with the total budgets for their municipality. And also included in this Plaintiff's Exhibit 3 is a comparison, summarized, of the salary budget as a percent of the total budget for each of the municipalities for each of the years.
At this time, Your Honor, we'd offer the evidence, Plaintiff's Exhibit 3.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 3 is admitted.
Dr. Bernard, could you walk us through your analysis of the total budget versus salaries and what you're showing there?
Sure. First, the reason for the comparison is to look at budgets for salaries as a percentage of total budgets for the municipality, to see how dollars totally are allocated by what entity. And to make it apples to apples for each of the municipalities, Chicago, Hobart, Maryville, and Cherville, we use the general fund in each case for that entity, and then use the official court salary figures for each of those entities. And in comparing them, we came up with a percentage in each case. Percentage of what? Salaries for each entity as a percentage of their general fund. Okay, for years 2008 through 2012. And if you have a copy in front of you, Your Honor, you can see, to take example, 2008, East Chicago, the general certified budget for that year was $38,735,591, and the court salary budget for that same year was $658,011. So right below that I have S divided by TB, which is the salaries taken as a percentage of the total budget. And that works out to 1.6% for that particular year for East Chicago. And I did a similar calculation for each successive year for East Chicago, 09 through 12, and then a similar calculation for the other three municipalities to see how East Chicago court salaries relative to the total budget of that entity compared with salaries for other entities compared to their total budgets, to see if East Chicago is above or below or in the same general vicinity as the other entities. So we could do it year by year, but I did an average for all 5 years. So for the years 2008 through 2012, East Chicago averaged 1.69%, meaning the court salaries as a percentage of the entity's certified general fund budget was 1.69% on average for those 5 years. It varied a little bit year by year, but it was the average. Now for Hobart, Maryville, and Cherville, we did the same calculation and used the same comparison, their salary for their courts versus their general fund. And so for Hobart for the 5 years, it worked out to 1.82% on average, meaning in Hobart, their court salaries as a percentage of the Hobart general fund was 1.82% on average for those 5 years. And for Maryville, the average is 3.9%, and for Cherville, 3.52% for those 5 years. It varied somewhat year by year, but that's the average for the 5-year period.
So the number, the larger number for each of the years For example, East Chicago, $38,735,591. That's from the Indiana Local Government Finance
Right.
Statistics for that calendar year.
Correct, the certified general fund, right.
And the $658,011, that's from the annual judicial reports. Is that
Correct.
If you were looking at the averages over those 5 years, as an economist, comparing the total budget versus salaries, how does the salary portion of the budget of the East Chicago City Court compare to the three other municipalities?
Well, it's slightly lower than Hobart. It's a little bit more lower versus Maryville and Cherryville. Cherryville and Maryville are roughly twice, but East Chicago and Hobart is approximately the same, slightly higher for Hobart. But what that means is Maryville and Cherryville's allocation to the court salaries as a percentage of their general fund is larger than East Chicago's allocation to salaries as a percentage of their overall budget.
Then, in the reports of the various courts in Indiana, in addition to the salary portion of the budget of the court, do they also list a summation of the total expenses attributable to each court in the state of Indiana?
Yes, they did.
Let me show you what has been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 4. And could you describe for the court what that is, please?
Sure. Plaintiff's Exhibit 4 compares the total budget versus the summation of expenses in each of the courts. And it's done for all 4 entities, and it's done for the 5 years, 2008 through 2012, again with averages of total expenses in the court compared to the total entity's budget.
At this time, Your Honor, we offer in evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit 4.
No objection, Your Honor.
Or is admitted.
Again, calling your attention just to the averages stated there. As an economist, how does East Chicago compare with Hobart, Maryville, and Cherryville when you look at the total court expenses according to the reports to the Judicial Center compared to the total budget?
East Chicago and Hobart are virtually the same. East Chicago was 1.92%, meaning its total summation of expenses compared to its municipal budget is 1.92% on average for those 5 years. Hobart is 1.972%. Compared to Maryville and Cherryville, they are higher. Maryville is 4.35% on average, and Cherryville is 4.04%. So, again, similar to the Plaintiff's Exhibit 3, where we just compare salaries, East Chicago is certainly not being allocated a higher percentage. In fact, it's lower in court expenses compared to the entity's total budget. It's receiving a lower percentage share than Maryville and Cherryville.
Now, when you look at Mr. Sender's report, which he prepared at the request of the East Chicago Common Council, did you see that Mr. Sender was questioning the salary portion of the budget and was also questioning whether certain employees in the clerk's office in East Chicago should be the salary of those employees should be attributed to the court.
Correct. In his analysis, he indicated in Exhibit A, page 6, and then in Exhibit K, he did a breakdown of the calculation, and basically what he opined was that of the 15 clerks in East Chicago, out of the clerk's office, nine of them and their salaries should be attributable to the court expenses. And so he does a prorated calculation and says that for 2011, some $427,789 of the clerk's salaries in Chicago courts should be counted as part of salaries. And then in addition to that, he argues, again, I'll refer back to Exhibit A, page 6, where he lists for East Chicago salaries at $797,564, not counting the clerks that we just mentioned. That is a different number than what we just referred to in Plaintiff's Exhibit 3 and 4, which had the East Chicago court salaries at some $523,000. I can't find in his exhibit the difference of some $208,000 where that came from. I'm guessing maybe it's overtime or fringe benefits that were not included in the base salary, but I don't know the answer to that differential. But assuming he's accurate with both figures, the $797 and then adding to it the $427,000, I prepared a separate calculation based on that. So,
let me show you
Sure.
what has been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 5 for identification purposes. And could you tell the court what that is?
correct. Plaintiff's Exhibit 5 is entitled Total Budgets versus Summation of Expenses, but for only 1 year, 2011, for East Chicago, Hobart, Maryville, and Sherrville. But it includes, for East Chicago, the figure that Mr. Sender uses in his Exhibit A of $1,225,353 as the costs attributable to the East Chicago courts, including the 9 out of 15 clerks that he's prorated.
And then did you make a comparison of the East
Yes,
Chicago budget, making that assumption that Mr. Sender is correct,
Right.
to the budgets of Hobart, Maryville, and Sherrville?
right.
All right, let me count the exhibit. We've already had
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. Zip number 5.
So Exhibit 5, we're assuming that Mr. Sender is correct, or we're taking what Mr. Sender tells us about his assumption for the budget of East Chicago City Court for the year 2011. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Sender has made the assumption that somehow the official...
Judge, I got to object to that. Counsel cannot assume what assumptions, or representative, what assumptions Mr. Sender did.
You want to rephrase your question?
In Mr. Sender's analysis, does he disagree with the reported amount of expenses for the East Chicago City Court as contained in the report to the Judicial Center versus what he believes they actually are?
He does, and he also states in his footnote that, and this is on page 5 of Exhibit A, he states, it appears, and I'll quote here from his report, it appears that expenditures obtained from the city of East Chicago, which would be the official reports, are greater than what was submitted to the state by approximately $209,000. So he is disagreeing, and he's attributing a higher number, $797,564 for the year 2011, as the East Chicago salary figures before he prorates for the additional clerks.
So your Exhibit 5 takes Mr. Sender's number of $797,564, and it also takes his assumption that $427,789 of the salaries of the elected clerk of the East Chicago, the elected clerk of the city of East Chicago are attributable to the court. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So using Mr. Sender's assumptions for the budget for the calendar year 2011, how does the budget of the East Chicago City Court, the assumed budget by Mr. Sender, compare to Hobart, Maryville, and Sherrillville?
Well, for East Chicago, the percentage of summation of expenses using Mr. Sender's numbers works out to 3.76%, meaning that in East Chicago, the $1.225 million as a percentage of the budget of $32 million is 3.76. Now, how does that compare to Hobart, Maryville, and Sherrillville? Well, for Hobart, using the figures we used in Plaintiff's Exhibit 4, and the same for Maryville and Sherrillville, Hobart is 2%, a little over 2%, and Maryville is 5%, and Sherrillville is 4.3%. So East Chicago is almost double Hobart. It's a little less than Sherrillville and Maryville. And that's for 2011, because I believe in Mr. Sender's report, that was the only year for which he articulated these higher court salary expenses.
Now, did I also ask you to make a comparison of the assumed figures of Mr. Sender versus the actual certified budget of the city of East Chicago for the year 2013?
Yes.
Let me show you what has been marked as Exhibit 6. Could you explain that summary, please?
Right. Exhibit 6 is similar to Exhibit 5, with the difference that Exhibit 6 uses 2013 and Exhibit 5 uses 2011. We used the same number that Mr. Sender had in his report, $1.225 million, but we used the 2013 certified budget for East Chicago of $25,859,000. And that gave us a percentage of 4.74%. That is the expenses attributable to the court in East Chicago as a percentage of the general fund certified budget, 4.74%. That's higher than Hobart, which is 2%, and for Hobart and Maryville and Sherrillville, we used the 2011 figures. But it's 2% in Hobart, 5% in Maryville, 4.3% in Sherrillville. So it's It's a little higher than Sherrville, it's a little lower than Maryville, it's quite a bit higher than Holbrook.
We're offering that claim as Exhibit 6, Your Honor.
No objections, Judge?
Exhibit 6 is admitted.
So when you compare the budget figures on Exhibit 4, the City of East Chicago has reduced its overall budget for the calendar year 2008, continued in 2009, continued in 2010, continued in 2011, and continued in 2012. And that same thing carried over to 2013, is that correct?
Correct.
But even using Mr. Sender's assumed numbers, the percentage of the assumed court budget versus the certified East Chicago budget for 2013, the court budget is 4.74% versus the percentages you have for the other municipalities.
Versus 2%, versus 5%, versus 4.3%.
Finally, then, Dr. Bernard, did I ask you to make a comparison of the salaries of the East Chicago City Court, starting with the calendar year 2004 up to and including 2012, and show how inflation has affected those salaries?
Yes, you did ask me to do that.
Let me show you what's been marked as exhibit number 7. Could you explain that summary to the court, please?
Yeah, Exhibit 7 shows East Chicago City Court salaries adjusted for inflation 2004 to 2012. And we took the court salary figures in each of the years, starting in 2004, and then we adjusted it by what the reported CPI inflation rate was as put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics for each successive year, 05, 06, 07, 08, 09, 10, 11, and 12. So that as you adjusted it, the bottom line here is that a $418,805 salary budget in 2004 would take the equivalent of $508,464 in the year 2012 to have the same purchasing power. And that's simply adjusting it for the inflation figures for those intervening years. What sometimes economists call in real dollars, where you take out the inflation as opposed to nominal dollars. This would be constant dollars. So.
This is the offering evidence, plaintiff's exhibit 7.
No objections, Judge.
7 is admitted.
correct then in reading your Exhibit 7? The conclusion is that the salary portion of the budget has just stepped up with inflation in that 8-year period?
Pretty much, it's pretty close because the budget is... They're very close because the actual budget of $511,000 for salaries in East Chicago in 2012 would compare with the adjusted inflation salary of $508,464. So they would be pretty much it kept up with inflation if you look at the salary figures.
Examination, Mr. Brown?
He's not.
Are you done? I thought you said.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I thought.
No, Your Honor, we have no further questions.
Okay, Bob?
Your Honor, do you have Exhibits 3 and 4 in front of you?
Yes, I do.
I would like to, Professor, I'm Attorney Stephen Bauer.
Okay.
I represent the Common Council. And I would like to address your attention to Plaintiff's Exhibits 3 and 4 that have been admitted in evidence.
Okay.
You have those in front of you, sir.
Right, I don't have those exhibits, but I've got the matching.
You want to? You have them, Paul, or do I have?
Judge, you have him, but he has copies.
I have copies.
If he's got, I'm talking about the total budgets versus salaries. That's 20,
Yes, right.
and the total budget
Versus
versus
summation.
summary of expenses.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Professor, the first thing I'd like to ask you, is it not accurate that the total budget for the city of East Chicago, beginning in 2008 through 2012, decreased by $8 million?
That is correct.
So it would appear, would it not, sir, that elected officials in the city of East Chicago was trying to rein in the spending in their budgets?
The budget would suggest that the budget was cut by the $8 million that you mentioned.
Let me direct your attention also now to, let's look at 2011 and the first four, the columns having to do for 2011 for salaries. And scan at what Cherville, Maryville, Hobart, and East Chicago city courts had for salaries in 2011.
Okay?
Okay. I would ask you to compare those amounts. Which city or town is the highest?
East Chicago.
And by how much?
Compared to Hobart, it's about $215,000 higher. Compared to Maryville, it's about $162,000 higher. I'm just doing off the top of my head here. And then compared to Cherville, it's $225,000 higher.
All right. And does that indicate that Hobart, Maryville, and Cherville were operating their courts with less salaries?
It would say, would be accurate, yes.
So if you were to compare the actual salaries as reported, to the state that's contained in your Exhibit 3, it is certainly reasonable to say that East Chicago is substantially higher than those other three communities.
I would say that's a reasonable conclusion if you look at absolute dollars as opposed to percentages.
Yes.
Right.
Do you have any information, sir, as to why the East Chicago General Fund budget was so much higher than Maryville, Hobart, or Sheriffville?
I really don't know. I haven't investigated.
That you were not asked to do
No.
that assignment?
They had a higher budget, that's all I know.
Do you know what additional services the city of East Chicago provides to its citizens that's not being provided, like by the town of Maryville?
I've not done a comparison of the town's service like trash pickup or water or fire or police and compared it to the other three cities, no.
Do you know how many police officers are on staff in the city of East Chicago?
No.
Do you know how many are on staff in Maryville?
No, I didn't do that study.
Would it surprise you to learn that East Chicago has at least twice the number of police officers that the town of Maryville has?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if you look at the budget figures that they would have more police, if they have a higher budget. But I don't know the answer to that question as to how many.
Do you know if the town of Maryville runs a transportation system of any kind?
No.
Do you know if the city of East Chicago does?
No. As I said, I haven't investigated those comparisons.
Do you know what the garbage rate that's being charged in the city of East Chicago for garbage pickup?
I think it's free, but
Do you know how Maryville handles its garbage
No.
pickup? Will it surprise you to know that Maryville contracts it out and people have got to pay around $19 a month for their home garbage pickup?
it wouldn't surprise me. I assume that's accurate.
Doctor, what I'm getting to here is when you look at the incredibly high budget that's in East Chicago, isn't it necessary to see what in fact the city is providing? What services they're providing?
Well, not for what I was asked to do. What I'm asked to do is to see if the salaries in the court are reasonable compared to their budget relative to the other three cities.
Okay, but you were not asked to compare the expenses of the East Chicago court with the expenses of the courts in similar sized cities.
Well, we did compare the expenses relative to the total budget. We didn't compare it in terms of, I think what you're getting at is what's in that budget in terms of what they spend it on.
Not asked that at all.
Okay.
I'm talking about the total amount.
Total amount? Okay.
If you look at Exhibit 4,
Okay.
let's just look at the year 2011.
Okay.
Is it not accurate that for Sheriffville, you show a summary of expenses of $327,000?
Mm-hmm.
And for East Chicago, $523,000.
Correct.
Total expenses in Maryville, $386,000.
Right.
Total expenses in Hobart, $327,000.
Right.
So there's a substantially more expenses to run the city of East Chicago court than in those other three cities.
Well, on a absolute dollar basis, that is accurate. But their budget for the courts as a share of the total budget is reasonable compared to the other three.
Well, and that's your theme and thesis here today.
That is correct.
All right. You're not here, are you, sir, in testifying that the amount of expenditures to run the East Chicago City Court is reasonable in comparison with the actual expenditures spent in Hobart, Maryville, and Sheriffville?
No, I have not done a time and motion study to evaluate that. It's reasonable as a percentage of each entity's total budget.
You left the school board in 2009?
Correct.
Chose not to get appointed again?
I had 3 terms, and I applied, but I was not reappointed for a 4th term.
And was Carl Cinder appointed to the school board?
Not that year.
But the following?
I believe the following year, but he was appointed by the city council of Valparaiso, I was appointed by the Center Township trustees.
So-
Different appointing bodies.
So, two accountants, or economist and an accountant, are both appointed to the Valparaiso School Board.
Different times, right? Where,
Dr. Bernard, were you provided with any information by Judge Morris's attorney about the number of employees in the East Chicago City Court?
I was not, other than information contained in,
Carl Sinder's report.
correct, of the 15 clerks in the city of Chicago, which he suggests 9 of the 15 are doing court work and prorated. That's the only information I had.
You, though, did look at the state statistics put out on the reported expenses for the court that you can get online.
Correct.
Did you, in examining those statistics, did you look at the breakdown of the various employees among these 4 city and town boards?
No.
So you're not aware that in 2011, both Hobart and Maryville listed 6 staff members as clerks?
No.
And you're also not aware that in all of the years reviewed by Carl Sinder for the Chicago City Court, I believe 09, 2010, and 2011, no clerks were listed as employees in the judge's report.
For East Chicago?
Yes.
I think for 11 he did. But,
She did.
well, you're talking about what Mr. Sender listed?
No, I'm
I'm sorry.
talking about, when you reviewed the printouts from the state, that wasn't what you were asked to do.
Correct.
So you don't know if in the expenses for the East Chicago City Court, there is any identification of having to have clerks.
Correct, yeah.
So if you've got any question with Carl Sinder's comments about, his footnote on page 6 and the clerks, it's not that you can't operate the court without clerks. It may only be as to how many.
No, my only comment on his footnote had to do with the $209,000 differential as to exactly how he came up with that number. I wasn't disputing the 9 clerks attributable to the court.
Just one more thing, Professor. Most of the statistics that we're dealing with, sometimes they talk about a line item for wages without fringe benefits, and other times there are budgets that have not only the wages but also the fringe benefits and a larger amount.
Right.
And I think what all of us have tried to do, and maybe not effectively, Your Honor, is to compare not one and a different one, but the same ones.
Right.
And so that's why there were some times that you had, we're talking about $550,000 or $510,000 salaries, and other places you have got amounts over $700,000. And I believe in your testimony, if I'm correct, help me out here, that a lot of that you're talking about FICA, you're talking about health care, you're talking about other fringe benefits. that actually run the cost out.
Correct.
For as long as you're comparing the same level, you can make the comparison.
Right, and we'd have to know whether for Hobart, Maryville, and Sherrville, those salary figures also include fringe.
Professor, did you investigate whatsoever the quantity of cases being decided by the city of East Chicago Court with Maryville, Sherrville, or Hope?
I didn't investigate it, I read what Mr. Sender had in his exhibit.
Do you have any comments about that? In other words, did you attempt to verify his facts and figures on the total amount of disclosed cases?
No, I assumed his figures were accurate.
So you didn't take the time, you weren't requested by
Right.
Attorney Schmall to take the time to look at that?
I was not asked to look at the cases pending or the cases settled for all of the entities.
Judge, that's all that I have.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Bernard, when you look at Exhibit 4, which is your total budget versus summation of expenses,
Yes.
for the calendar year 2011, as Mr. Bauer was asking you about 2011, when I look at the budgets of Hobart, Maryville, and Sherrville, the budgets of those three municipalities are less than the budget of the city of East Chicago for the year 2011. Is that correct,
That is
sir?
correct. Mhm.
And Mr. Bauer asked you about whether you compared governmental services with the governmental services or differences in government between the four municipalities.
Right.
Did you make any comparison of the city of East Chicago, the number of council members that the city of East Chicago has on its common council versus the number of council members that the town of Hobart, or excuse me, the town of Maryville, the town of Sherrville, and the city of Hobart have?
No, I didn't.
And again, if you would go to exhibit number 6,
Okay.
which is the calendar year 2013 comparison,
Yes.
assuming that Mr. Sender is correct, that the actual salary portion of the budget is what he says it is, and that the total expense for the East Chicago City Court is $1,225,000, $1,225,350.
53, yeah.
$353.
Right. That, as the footnote below indicates, that includes the $797,564 salary, plus the prorated share attributable to the 9 out of 15 clerks.
Right. If you look at the Sender figure compared to the certified budget for the city of East Chicago for the year 2013, the East Chicago City Court budget is comparable percentage-wise to the Maryville and Sherrville budgets as a percent of the gross budget. Is that correct, sir?
Correct.
No further questions.
Nothing more, Your Honor.
Okay. I have one question. Did anyone do an analysis of what the court brought in?
Judge,
The
we
fines and
have,
costs and fees
yes, we have that in exhibits that we're going
that
to,
you're going to present?
yes.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions of the witness, Your Honor?
No. Thank you.
Thank you.
You may step down.
Thank you.
Want to take a break, Judge? Or do
Pardon me?
you want to take a break?
I have to break at 11:30. We'll break for lunch at 11:30. How long do you think your next witness is going to take?
Shouldn't take very long.
Okay, then why don't we call your next witness? Doctor.
Thank you.
If you want to raise your right hand and be sworn, you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to the best of your knowledge?
I affirm.
Please be seated.
Would you state your name for the record, please?
Mary L. Hagler,
And where are you living, Mrs.
East Chicago, Indiana.
Are you employed by the East Chicago City Court?
Yes, I am.
Before you were employed by the East Chicago City Court, had you had other employment with the City of East Chicago?
Yes, I did.
Could you tell the judge what positions you held within the City of East Chicago before starting with the East Chicago City Court?
I was with the East Chicago Human Rights Commission for 23 years. I started out as an intake specialist, and when I left there, I was the director of the Human Rights Commission.
When did you start working for the East Chicago City?
February of 2004.
And what is your position with the East Chicago
I
City?
am the Community Programs Director.
Are you familiar with the court budget?
I do assist the judge.
And are you familiar with the employees who are working for the East Chicago City Court?
Yes, I am.
Let me show you what have been marked for identification purposes as Plaintiff's Exhibit 7 and Plaintiff's Exhibit 8.
You already have decided.
Okay, you're not understanding.
I'm sorry, I was scared. This one, this 9.
Let me show you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 8 and Plaintiff's Exhibit 9. Could you explain to the court what those two exhibits are, please?
They appear to be salary ordinance for appointed officers and employees of the City of Chicago. One is for the fiscal year 2012,
Which one is that?
Exhibit 8. Exhibit 9 is for the fiscal year 2013.
You don't have written evidence, Plaintiff's Exhibits 8 and 9.
Any objections, Mr. Bauer?
No objection, Judge.
All right, 8 and 9 is admitted.
Now, as far as exhibits 8 and 9 are concerned, those exhibits have the slotted salaries for the East Chicago City Court for the budget year 2012 and the budget year 2013.
Beginning on page 5, Exhibit 8. Page 6 of Exhibit 9.
Let me give you copies of those that contain the originals. Now, as far as the employees of the East Chicago City Court for the calendar year 2012 and 2013, does the East Chicago City Court have any employee which is not listed in Exhibit 8 or Exhibit 9?
Yes.
Excuse me?
No. All employees are listed.
Let me show you what's been marked for identification purposes as Plaintiff's Exhibit 10. Can you tell the court what that is, please?
This is the W-2 register for tax year 2011 for the city court.
And let me show you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 11. Can you tell?
This is the W-2 register for tax year 2012 for the city court.
We'd offer in the evidence Plaintiff's Exhibits 10 and 11, Your Honor.
John, may I see those? I don't think that you provided. No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibits 10 and 11 are admitted.
As far as Exhibit 10 is concerned, which is the W-2 register for the calendar year 2011, where did you obtain that document?
From Rob Johnson, who is the payroll manager for the City of Chicago.
And the same question regarding Exhibit number 11. Where did you obtain that document?
Rob Johnson, payroll manager for the City of Chicago.
Have you compared the names of the employees and their functions on Exhibits 10 and 11 to the salary ordinances for 2012 and 2013?
Yes, I have.
And are the salaries and employees listed on Exhibits 10 and 11 the titles and salaries that were approved by the budget of 2011 and 2011 and 2012?
Yes, I have. Yes, they are.
Let me show you what's been marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 12. Can you explain to the court what that is, please?
This is the 2013 projected salaries for the city court.
And again, the people that are listed on Exhibit 12, where did you get this information?
I believe I received this from Rob Johnson or either Kim Anderson, the controller, at the time of budget hearing.
You offered evidence, claims Exhibit 12.
Is this a copy? Oh, great. That's 13.
For 12.
No objection, Judge.
12 is admitted.
Again, calling your attention to Exhibit number 12, the people that are listed on that exhibit and their positions with the court. Are those people slotted in the budget for 2012?
Yes.
And the rate of pay for these people that are listed on Exhibit 12, is the rate of pay as indicated in the salary ordinance for the year 2012?
Yes.
Does Exhibit 12 indicate the date of hire on each of the employees of the court?
Yes, it does.
We have no further questions for Witness Shaw.
Cross-examination.
Mrs. Hagler, my name's Stephen Bauer. I'm attorney for the council. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
I'd like for you to take a look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 12, which you've just testified to as being the employees for the East Chicago City Court in 2013.
Yes,
I see there's a chief probation officer at $48,000.
yes,
And another probation officer for $43,492.
correct.
Are there any secretaries that work in probation?
Yes,
How many?
3.
So we have 2 probation officers and 3 secretaries in probation.
Yes.
Do you have any information as to the amount of cash that's in the adult probation fund?
No, I don't.
Would it surprise you if I told you it was over $150,000?
No, I just don't have it.
It's a pretty substantial amount.
Yes.
Judge, that's all that I have.
Redirect. Any?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down. Your next witness.
The judge will be the next
So
witness.
she's going to take a while, I presume.
Yes, sir.
You want to start her? Or?
Judge, my preference would be to start her. You still got 20 minutes, Your Honor.
All right, let's start. You want to raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to the best of your knowledge? Please be seated.
Could you state your name for the record, please?
Sonia Morris.
Could you tell the judge about your legal education, please?
Yes, I received a Juris Doctorate from the University of Chicago Law School,
And when did you receive that degree?
1989.
Are you the elected judge of the East Chicago City Court?
Yes, I am.
When were you elected judge of the East Chicago City Court?
2003, elected for the year 2004.
Now, does the City of East Chicago have a separately elected clerk of the City of East Chicago?
Yes,
And as far as the operation of the clerk's office, that's the purview of the clerk, on how she runs the office, is that correct?
yes.
If we look at Exhibit 12, does Exhibit 12 indicate the number of employees of the East Chicago City Court?
Yes.
Does the Exhibit 12 list the date of hire of the employees of the East Chicago City Court?
Yes.
Now, as far as the employees who were hired, which employees have been hired during your tenure as judge of the East Chicago City Court?
Kim Jackson, Andreas Curis, Lonnie Randolph, Marissa Alvarez, John Small, and Elizabeth Zuckers.
of those people that you mentioned, were those slotted positions for the East Chicago City Court before you became judge of the court?
Yes.
Now, you heard Mrs. Hagler testify that she's the community program director of the court.
Yes, but her years of service began in 1981.
Could you tell Judge Paris how it is that Mrs. Hagler came to be the community program director of the East Chicago City Court?
Yes. Ms. Hagler was the director of the East Chicago Human Rights Commission, and at the time of my election, the end of that year in 2003, the mayor said to Mary, and in 2004 said to myself, and that was Mayor Pastrick, that Mary will be moved into the court's budget, and that he was willing to move her to work with us under her basic salary that she had with the Human Rights Commission. And we were too excited to have Ms. Hagler on our staff. So we welcomed her as our community program director.
Now, since the year 2005, have you hired any new employees at the East Chicago City Court?
That would be Marissa Alvarez. She would be the only one in 2006.
Since 2006, have you hired any additional employees at the East Chicago City Court?
No.
Now, as far as people who were employed by the court when you first became judge in 2004, have some of those people left the court since you became elected?
Yes. The bailiff Raymond Diggs, the bailiff we have an additional bailiff,
Would that be Mr. Ola?
Dave Ola. We also have Felipe Hernandez.
And she's no longer there?
No. We lost Michelle Williams.
And who was Michelle Williams?
She was our court administrator. And Mrs. Mitchell.
And who was Mrs. Mitchell?
She was / secretary receptionist.
As far as the number of community service program people, how has that number changed since you become judge of the East Chicago City Court?
Well, we never filled those 3 positions. And in a conversation, in order to continue to assist the city with reducing the budget, we agreed with the then controller and Charlie Procure that we would remove those line items from our budget. We would never hire anyone in those positions, and finally we removed them from our line items in the budget. And that was 3 positions.
So since you became judge of the East Chicago City Court in 2004, you've lost 1 front desk personnel, Mrs. Mitchell. You've lost 2 bailiffs, Mr. Ola and Mr. Dix. You've lost the court administrator, Michelle Williams. You've lost an additional front desk personnel, Luby Hernandez. And then you eliminated the slots for 3 community service personnel. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, as far as the salaries of the court are concerned, the probation officers that you have, could you tell Judge Paris how that salary is determined for those probation officers?
As the judge knows, the probation officers' salaries are by statute. And in 2007, we took a look after our city and town court meetings we have yearly in October, and took a look at our 2 probation officers who've been there for quite some time, and try to match their salaries with their time of service. And so in the conversation with the controller, we advised and sent him a memo along with the attached statute that said, we want to be in line with the state court administrators, and it has always been our goal to stay out of any crosshairs with them, to put these persons in place with the salary ordinance, and they agreed.
Now, as the judge of the East Chicago City Court, are you required to file statements indicating the court budget and the court revenues with the state court administration in Indianapolis on a yearly basis?
Yes.
As far as the amounts of money that you show on the state court administration filing form, how do you obtain the dollar amount that you show for the salaries for the court?
At the time of preparation, myself and the probation chief and our program director, we contact Rob in the controller's office to ask for the actual dollar amount that was spent on the salary amount that was spent the year prior. And so in January or February, we received that information from him and placed that on our report.
Has anybody suggested to you before March of this year that there was any difference between what you were reporting to the state court administration on a yearly basis for court salaries versus what the city was showing as court salaries?
No.
Dr. Bernard had discussed Exhibit 7, the comparison showing the salaries over the years from 2004 to 2012. That information is taken from the state court reports. Is that the information that was furnished you for each of those years by Mr. Johnson or someone in the controller's office?
Yes.
As far as the salaries portion of the budget, according to the state court figures for the calendar year 2003, now this would be the year before you became judge, what was the salaries portion of the budget according to what the state court report showed?
For the court?
Let me show you, Judge. You got to start with this page first. Start with this page first. This is the salaries. And then you look at it, carries over to the second page. And the total is right there.
John, you want to be sworn?
Looks like 507,448 for East Chicago City Court.
So then by the time you got on to the court as the elected judge, the salaries portion of the budget had come down from what it had been in 2003. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's correct, I'm sorry.
Now let's talk about the functioning of the East Chicago City Court. As the judge of the East Chicago City Court, as far as the number of personnel that you have as employees of the court and the functions that each of those persons perform, in your opinion, are those persons necessary for the proper functioning of the court?
Yes, they are necessary, and it seems as if at some points we need more personnel, especially when you consider the longevity and the sometimes vacation time.
Why are those people necessary for the functioning of the court? If you go through each one, why, in your opinion, are they necessary for the proper functioning of the court?
If we look at our probation staff, as you know, Lake County or East Chicago especially has a Hispanic population that's greater than most of the other parts of this county. We have one probation officer that speaks Spanish, and then our chief probation officer, and they split the number of cases. We've had the opportunity to correct a lot of behavior through our probation department. Our probation department is important, along with their staff, because they help defer or refer some of the defendants to the programs we have. We have programs that help with drug and alcohol addiction. We also have a driving school program to help perfect or correct the driving records of persons. We have the community service program also, which is run through our probation department and their staff. So that probation department and the staff helps East Chicago run more effectively as a court, because many of the persons there do not have a finance that other cities and towns would have, where you could just simply find them like I see, sometimes a fine calls for public intoxication when it would be better for them to be in an alcohol program. So probation is very important. Our bailiffs are even more so important. We have a public safety facility that is open to the public, as opposed to this court building where your access would have to be through the sheriff's officers, and you would have to be scanned to get in, where you have access to the building from maybe 2 doors, and the only access into the court is through the scanners. So we need our bailiff staff for in-court, we need them for the transports, and we need them to remain at the door for the persons that come in and out to be scanned for weapons and any other contraband. It's important to note that East Chicago now has an influx of persons from other areas, and they do not have the same mentality that the citizens of East Chicago had, or at least historically, when I grew up in East Chicago, where you knew that in certain parts of town you never behaved a certain way, or late at night a lot of crime was not happening. Now we have this burgeoning crime in East Chicago by persons who are not familiar, and when they arrive at court, they believe that it's sort of like a picnic or a park, and they should be able to behave in any manner. And so we need that staff to help reiterate that this remains a court of law. The bailiffs are also important because we do not have a court officer. The police department is attached, but they do not support us inside of the courtroom.
Had the police of East Chicago provided security at the court in earlier years?
Yes, we've always had a court officer, and the mayor, the new mayor, Anthony Copeland, determined that it would not be necessary because he needed these officers on the street. I advised him that the same persons that they're arresting on the street are the same people who are arriving in the courtroom, and that it would be helpful or welcome, according to the state court administrators and to the national court system, the judicial center in Reno, that we had for court safety that a court officer be in the courtroom.
Now, when you make a budget request and submit a proposed budget to the city council, could you tell the court how you go about preparing that proposed budget for each calendar year?
Understanding that from the time I arrived, the city announced to the court that we were in financial straits. And that was under the Patrick administration. And I arrived there with a number of employees that were not included in the budget. And when they realized that in August of 2004, they placed money into the budget to cover those employees. Since that time, we've taken a look at our operational expenses and the employees' duties and continued with a budget that began in 2004. A while later, we were told that we can now increase the budget by a certain percentage. And we attempted to do that maybe in 2007, but we then went on furlough. And so, since that time, there has been a 10% reduction in the salaries up until August, of 2013, when the mayor prepared an executive order that said that we were no longer on furlough because I assumed that we received the monies that they've been waiting for. And they were able to take the city off furlough. But the city court has supported all efforts in reducing the budget and joining in with every furlough request.
Well, you heard Mr. Bauer say that it's shared sacrifice in the city of East Chicago.
And we agree.
Is the court, in your opinion, shared in that sacrifice?
We agree. I think the city side of East Chicago has just joined in with the shared sacrifice, because in 2008 we were told by 2012 that the funds would not be available and that we needed to start reducing our budget. So there was never a request for another employee. As we lost the employees, they were gone. We then agreed along with the city, and we did that in writing, that we would agree to the furlough that all of the other cities, because it's shared. We are part of the city of East Chicago, and therefore if the city is struggling, then the court is struggling. And so we agreed, although I believed our salaries were low for these positions, that we would join in, and for 5 years or more we've been a part of that furlough program. And then we started moving monies from our court programs, which is the driving school, the probation, and the public defender fund, and use that for our operational expenses.
Well, you know, as far as this shared sacrifice goes, Judge Morris, did you offer to voluntarily reduce your salary by 10% so that your salary would be reduced to the same extent that the salary of the employees of the court were reduced because of the furlough days?
The council president wrote a letter to the court and to me directly to say, you know, the mayor, and at the time it was Council President Medina, and the mayor was Babay, that we've agreed to reduce our salaries, and we want to know whether or not you will join in. And in response, we wrote a letter back to them saying, here are our timesheets. We thought that this meant everyone. And so on our timesheet, I've been signing off on the reduction with the rest of the staff. Of course, we will agree to do that. And so, yes, we agreed.
And then, at some point in time, did the city attorney advise that you couldn't agree to a voluntary reduction in your wage?
Yes.
Or your salary?
Yes, we were informed that that was an illegal reduction in the salaries of the judge, the clerk, and the mayor, I suspect, and any council person would agree.
Mr. Small, do we want to break now?
That's fine, Ron.
Okay, let's break now. We'll reconvene between 12:30 and 1, okay?
At what time, Judge?
1:45.